Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Blessing of the Lord be upon you.
We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Thank you. We are continuing in our study of the story of Jesus, chronological study of the four Gospels. We are on lesson number 16. So sorry we didn't get lesson 15 videos last week. I've determined what I'll do, whether to repeat that in a setting or just do it at home and whatever later on, but we have plenty of time to be able to do that. But as for today's study, we're going to start at Matthew chapter 4, verse 13 through 16, which is a continuation where we left off last week. We got Jesus from Judea, the wilderness, after John the immerser's arrest, and he's gone to, I believe, Jerusalem for Pentecost, and then traveled up through Samaria, John chapter 4, then into Nazareth, where he teaches at his home synagogue, and they don't like the message that he brought, so they take him out to stone him. And he's going to go to Capernaum, set up that Capernaum as his home base for almost the entirety of his earthly ministry. Now there'll be times that he will go to Jerusalem for the festivals, and later on, near the end, he'll spend some time back down in the wilderness of Judea. But for the bulk of his earthly ministry, he's going to be in Galilee. But this is where we pick up, looking at Matthew's account now. Matthew chapter 4, verses 13 through 16, because this is Matthew explaining what's going on, why he is leaving. We know why he left Nazareth. They rejected him, but setting up why this ministry is being centered in Capernaum. Matthew 4, 13 through 16. And leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea. And that's, of course, the Sea of Galilee, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, or Naphtali, but we typically say Naphtali, don't we? Okay, so that's what we use. So that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled: the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light, and for those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. We'll break it down, verse 13. More exactly, Naphtali. But the region included Zebulun, Asher, and Issachar. That's that northern region that when the kingdom divided between Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel, of course, they were in the far north. And they were in that northern part of Israel. The faithful went down to Judah. It doesn't mean all the faithful, but most of them did. They didn't want to worship the calves that Jeroboam had set up. And after the Assyrian destruction of Samaria, that northern kingdom, a lot of these people are taken out. Other people are brought in. We talked about that with the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. There's a lot of idol worship that goes on. And eventually they bring back some priests and Levites who had been exiled to teach them the ways of the land. We talked about that. So there was some measure of Yahweh worship that was in Samaria. But now we're talking about north of Samaria, where the Samaritans lived, where Jesus was brought up in this region, and these people are worshiping like the people in Jerusalem and Judea, but they're still considered by the very faithful, like the Pharisees down in Jerusalem and around the temple. They're considered Gentiles, or we would probably say more like second-class citizens, outcast. Outcast. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Could anything good come out of that region up there? Look at their history. And of course we know that how many, we don't know how many, but think of how many people come from that region. They have the synagogues, they're teaching the law, and how many of them come to Jerusalem for the festivals? And will make the long journey because they will go over to Capernaum and down the east side of the Jordan River to avoid Samaria, clear down to Jericho and up to Jerusalem for these festivals. They were fairly dedicated, weren't they? But still they were looked down upon. We'll get to that in a minute. But Zebulun, Asher, Issachar, and East Manasseh. Now some of these parts were part of what was that current day Samaria, but much of it was under what we would call Jewish control, because in the western part, that's the area that's controlled by Herod Antipas. Talk about him. He's the one who had John arrested. Verses 14 through 16, where it talks about the prophecy, the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea. That's from Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. So it's a prophecy. And again, it talks about the Gentiles, Galilee of the Gentiles, and the people have seen a great light. But that's because the Pharisees and many of the Judeans would consider them Gentiles, even though they're not. Well, there's a great Gentile presence there, and especially in cities like Capernaum. Talk about Capernaum. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. But they're considered outcasts, which slightly above the Samaritans, but not too much. In the shadow, those dwelling in the region and shadow of death. Remember what was close by? Talked about this in sermons when we went going through the book of Mark, up by Caesarea Philippi, Mount Hermon. And that's where, as the Gentiles came in and brought all their gods, they had all these heathen, pagan temples on that mountain. And that's probably why it's called the region of death, the region and shadow of death. And it says to them a light has dawned. Let me ask you something. Where is it easier to shine a light? In the dark or out in the sunshine? That's where it's most notable, isn't it? If we spend our time shining our light in the sunshine, how profitable are we going to be? We got to shine our light in some darkness, don't we? That's where he's a prophet. Well, consider that. In God's formulation, how are we going to present the gospel of Jesus Christ? Are we going to do it down here in Judea? Or are we going to go up here in the shadows and shine the light? Is that in God's formulation? Clear back at the time of Isaiah. Capernaum was an important fishing and trade center on the Sea of Galilee. And that becomes the base of operations for Jesus and his earthly ministry. But we talked about this with the wise men coming from the east. Trade route come over to that area, Sea of Galilee. And they could go west, they could go north, they could come down south. This is why we have the stories of Zacchaeus, the tax collector. This is like on the outreaches where this route, this trade route coming in, they could stop these caravans and tax them at this place. But there were a lot of Gentiles who had moved there. They didn't have to come into the heart of the Judean realm. They could live in cities like this. Now, from what I understand, there were larger cities in this region, Gentile cities, than Capernaum. But Capernaum had a good mix because of where it was, and there on the Sea of Galilee, there's a lot of industry, and being on the trade routes, they could get their stuff sent out pretty quickly. And it's suggested by some that James and John and Peter and Andrew and those who were fishermen, especially John and James, who were brothers, that in their fishing endeavors, that they had to contract with the chief priest. And that's how that John could get into the high priest's house when Jesus was on trial. That he was probably an emissary for trade to go down there, like a salesman selling the fish and going down and talking to these high priests who would sell the fish that they caught. Again, that's what some suspect. But that's why Capernaum, more than some of these, especially Nazareth. Nazareth is out there it's kind of like it's a place that's hard to get to. Capernaum's where everybody needs to travel through. Does that help to make sense? But it's also a place where Jesus can preach and teach and be accepted. He's going to have some problems. He's going to have people who are against him, questioning him. But for the most part, they're going to be open to what he's saying. So here, any questions on that first part? We good? All right. This next part, then we go to Mark. Mark chapter 1, verse 16 through 20, and it's also Matthew 4, 18 through 22. Basically tells the same story. Now, we're going to have another slide in Luke's account, because Luke is going to add some context to this. So I want to get through these today, especially this group. Hopefully some more, but these today. Mark chapter 1, verse 16 through 20. We've got Jesus at Capernaum. Passing alongside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon, who is Peter and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who were in their boat mending the nets. And immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and followed him. That must have been a big fishing operation for James and John and their father Zebedee, right? And that's basically the same thing you're going to find in Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 22. So, the important thing that we're looking at here is the addition of like 4 more disciples who are going to become apostles. How many do we know of for certain before this? 2. Know who they were? Philip and Nathaniel. They come with him from Judea. They were probably the ones who were with him talking to the woman in Samaria. There may have been more, but these are the ones, if you go back to John chapter 1, verse 43 through 51, that Jesus is talking to. Well, Peter was also there in the wilderness with John. And Andrew was there, and James and John were there. They didn't follow him immediately. So these will be added to Philip and Nathaniel. Jesus had met Andrew and Peter while in the Judean wilderness with John the Baptizer.
Sorry,
Yes.
can I ask a question? So, when he discovers, I think Peter and Andrew, did you just say, well, no, they didn't immediately go with him, or they did? Because wasn't there the story where they couldn't catch any fish, and so he said, throw your nets out. They
Okay.
got there yet?
You're missing what I said. They were with John. Andrew and Peter were with John in the wilderness, along with Philip and Nathaniel, when Jesus was baptized. Philip and Nathaniel began following Jesus there. Peter and Andrew and James and John don't.
All right.
And that's where we're stopping for now.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay?
All right,
Because we're doing this contextually.
gotcha. I'm with you.
Okay. So, how had now if Peter and Andrew and James and John had continued somewhat with John, the immerser, now they're back fishing. Correct? Because we got them at the Sea of Galilee fishing. Isn't that kind of a parallel to what happens later after Jesus is arrested and crucified? What does Peter do? What do? They go back to fishing. So, the question I have here, what effect did John's arrest have on these disciples of John? When John was arrested, did Peter say, well, he's not the Messiah. He's not the one. He's not going to get an army up and we're going to drive out the Romans. I'm going back fishing. This is exactly what he does later on with Jesus. Did he do the same thing then? And presumably be the leader of these other 3 men. You you see what I'm saying? We're kind of putting the scenes together going on here. So Jesus finds them, verses 17 and 18, and calls them to follow him, which they do immediately. And his plea is, follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. Which essentially we're talking about souls. James and John are there also, verses 19 and 20. John becomes known as the disciple whom Jesus loved, which means what? He becomes Jesus' closest friend. Peter's always aggravating Jesus. Peter's always saying things that get Jesus a little bit upset, but Jesus recognizes him more of the outgoing leader. John more the contemplative, and we say pastoral, easygoing, hey, let's talk about this kind of guy. Takes all kinds to make up followers that Jesus does. And it takes those who are ready to, let's go get it, and others say, now let's think about this, and let's take your energy and my thoughts, and let's do this in a proper way. See what I'm saying? That's why Jesus calls 12. Okay, do you have questions on just this part? Now we go to Luke. And this is the added context. And when Luke, Matthew and Mark and then Matthew seems to follow Mark. At least that's what the scholars say. And here he's giving you the brief study of it. Here's what happens. The headline maybe. Luke, when he goes back and he's talking to people, and he's talking to Peter, he's talking to John, because James didn't kill, probably all the remaining apostles and whomever. He says, you know what? There's a little more to the story here. What's going on? Because if we read Mark and Matthew, it's kind of like Jesus walks by and says, hey, come follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. And they just drop everything and go. That's not exactly what happens, and that's, okay, here's one of the big reasons why we want to read the Bible chronologically, contextually, to get the whole story. All right, Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Nazareth, which is another name for the Sea of Galilee. And he saw two boats by the lake. But the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the people from the boat. Now, I'll just throw this in. Simon Peter, of course, but he recognized him from being with John down in the wilderness. And he said, okay, I'll take you out a little ways in the boat. Because you were with John, and John said some things about you, and I'm interested in hearing that. Verse 4. And when he had finished speaking, in other words, doing his lesson, he said to Simon, put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And And this is where Simon Peter shows Simon Peter. And Simon answered, Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets. And when he had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were great. Notice, their nets. Who's that? Who's there? Peter and his brother Andrew. Verse 7. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. Oh man, how'd you like to be fishing like that? But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, You're a better fisherman than I am, Jesus. No, that's not what he said. He said, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. But why would he say that?
The last two he really won before his.
What had he just done? He expressed a doubt. We fished all night, we didn't catch anything, but if you say so, I'll do it. I don't think we're going to catch anything, but he doubted. He's not doubting Thomas here, he's not doubting Peter. But he's kind of given up on the messianic hope, hasn't he? Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, O Lord. Verse 9, for he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of the fish, or of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. They were in business together. And Jesus said to Simon, Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men. Look, I'll make you what? Fishers of men. And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. So now you see how Luke adds context to the story. That's wonderful. Jesus just didn't walk by and say, follow me, then they go. Jesus was teaching, the crowd was pressing, getting closer to him. They get to the Sea of Galilee. He gets in the boat to take me out a little bit so the crowd can't get to him, and he's teaching. Plus, why do you use whistles on water to communicate lots of times? Sound travels really well over water. Jesus' voice would carry over the water. It's like amplification. It's like having a PA system. And everybody could hear. Peter's in the boat apparently with him. And he gets done with his lesson. He says, and Peter sees what's going on. He hears the lesson. He goes out. This big catch of fish is there. There are a lot of things that happen. He just doesn't blindly follow Jesus. He has some evidence. Evidence brings faith comes by hearing the Word of God. Oh, but show me a miracle. Show you one. What are you going to want? Another one. Then another one. Then a bigger one. Believe the evidence. You believe the evidence. So Luke adds context to the story. they were washing their nets, and in some places it says mending their nets. Was that in the other accounts that we had? And Peter says, and at first and complies. The miracle of the large catch of fish convinces them that Jesus is the Messiah. Let's see, that's evidence that what he's saying is correct. The four leave their boats and join Philip and Nathanael as traveling disciples of Jesus. And we're going to see them traveling together. Can you imagine what Zebedee is thinking? That's John and James and John's father. You don't leave me with all this work, and you're taking Peter and Andrew too, the partners? Our business is going to be ruined. There's some things more important than business.
But they also, obviously, I think the fishermen had contracts, 6 contracts with the Romans, right, to provide fish or something along those lines or something.
Possibly with the Romans, possibly with people, I would say shops or stores, but yeah, and that's where the suggestion comes that they had a contract with the chief priest, the high priest, and that's why John later can go in and talk to somebody at the gate and go in when Jesus is on trial at the high priest. That's unusual. But what I want you to see is context. When you put this in context, how much it amplifies a story. So are we good here? I don't have too many more. Oh, yeah. So they leave there. Peter and Andrew, James and John start following him. So Jesus, now we know of 6 disciples, they're called. There may be more, but these are 6 that are going to become apostles later. Mark chapter 1, verse 21 through 28. And they went into Capernaum, into the city, and immediately on the Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and was teaching. What does immediately mean? So was Peter, Andrew, James, and John fishing on the Sabbath? Remember when their Sabbath starts? Friday evening. What is our Friday evening? And they fished all night, and now the immediately, it can be the next day. See what I'm trying to impress upon you? If they were working on the Sabbath, who would have called them out? Jesus would have called them out. So sometimes we've got to be careful about this. It looks like, well, they just leave there and they go over, but it's like the next Sabbath day, he's going to go. He's going to go to the synagogue and he's going to start teaching. Verse 22. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority. Oh, Our lesson today is going to be about authority. Jesus' authority. And he gives an illustration of authority there at Mark chapter 12. But we'll get to that in a sermon. And he taught us one who had authority and not as the scribes. We'll talk about that in a little while. Verse 23, and immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, what have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. But Jesus rebuked him, saying, be silent and come out of him. And the unclean spirit convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, what is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. This is also in Luke chapter 4, second part of verse 31 down through verse 37. But this Mark has the greater more text that goes with it. So we just go through Mark's account. All right. So verses 21 through 22. Jesus taught those wives, what's the difference? The difference is he's not quoting various rabbis, but expounding the scriptures and giving the context. In their way of approaching Bible study, they would come to a passage and they would say, Rabbi so-and-so says this. And Rabbi so-and-so says this. There's another rabbi over here that says this. Do we do that? Sometimes we do when there is an issue on the table that's hard to understand, and we might say, well, here's what the scholars say, because it's a difficult passage, and we've got to take in as much information as we can to make our decision. But Jesus didn't do that. Jesus expounded the scriptures and he gave the context. And remember some of the things we're talking about in the book of Mark, going through the Gospel of Mark and the sermons, is that, they'd ask him a question and boom, he would give an answer that made sense. It was logical. It was reasonable. And it's, wow, that's the truth. So that's the difference. He's speaking like someone who actually knows what the scriptures mean. And he can do that because who was there when the scriptures were given? He was. Okay? The Holy Spirit's guiding the writers, but he was there. The demons and unclean spirits knew who Jesus was. In other words, if you go to John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, all things were made by him. Does that mean the demons were made by him? Yes. The demons were made by Jesus, but they weren't made to be demons. They were made to be good servants, ministers of God, who, because they were given free will, as we are, they chose to be evil, following Satan. Does that make sense? So they knew who he was. Well, why didn't they just repent? Because they can't. Because they are of a higher estate than what we are. The angels who sin do not have the opportunity to repent. They're eternally condemned. Well, why are they causing such havoc? Why do they enter into people's bodies at times back here, and even into pigs' bodies? Because they're trying to sneak in to the kingdom. And it doesn't work, does it? Because if an evil spirit enters into a person's body, the person rejects it to a degree and turns out doing evil things. Even the pigs did something evil, didn't they? Remember what they did? They committed suicide. But it tells us that demons existed. But we got to flow back to understand. They knew who he was. And have you come to condemn us, destroy us? What is it? Before the time? Have you come to destroy us? It's the guy with the pigs later on. Or, yeah, later on. Have you come to destroy us before the time, or whatever, before the time?
Would have to actually just put them back in the abyss, didn't he? Probably.
Well,
Yes.
well, see, that's the question. Where, if he brings them out, where does he put them? He must put them in the abyss. Well, how did they get out of the abyss? Maybe they weren't in the abyss. Because what does Peter tell us about Satan? Satan walks about like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. Or what about his angels, his demon angels? Well, they were walking about too, and especially at different times within the scriptures. It's amazing that we don't see demonic forces acting like being able to reincarnate in bodies, take over human bodies. Throughout history, there are just times, like flashes, and it's typically when God is going to do something that God allows them to be released so that God can show his power to put them back. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and I don't mean to go off the rail a little bit, but I was curious about that. As you know, we don't really have, that I know of, demon possession today, so could that have ended after Jesus died on the cross?
Well, the suspicion, we wouldn't say that at the point where Jesus died upon the cross, but my thinking is at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, when the old covenant is fully done away with, when everything is changed. Because we see demon possession still in the book of Acts, up to nearly the end of the book of Acts. Does that mean that demons do not have an effect today. And I believe they do. I don't believe in demon possession. I believe people invite demons to control them. But it's more of a spiritual thing than a physical thing. And I could be wrong. But that's my opinion.
Okay. Thank you.
Keep losing my point. I lose my point. Yeah, he's showing his, the demons, unclean spirits knew he was, but their testimony's not welcome. He doesn't want the evil forces saying he's the Son of God. Why?
It's time yet. It's not his time yet.
Well, that might be part of it, but evil forces are liars, deceivers, deceptors. He doesn't want their testimony, regardless. He wants people to figure it out, looking at the evidence. But he has that authority over evil spirits. When the evil spirit comes out, it's with a loud cry, so it's painful. It's painful. And there's a reaction, which is amazement. And the people are questioning the meaning of the event. Look, and here's the important thing. It's just not the event. It's just not the miracle. It's questioning, why did this happen? Why is this going on? How could he do that? That's the important thing. And it's to show his authority, his power. He teaches with authority. Unclean spirits obey his commands. His fame spreads everywhere. But then there's a problem, even with that. His teaching still lags behind a little bit. Because even though his miracles and doing things like this is getting a lot of people to believe his word, people are still wanting what? To see miracles. We'll stop there today. It's almost 9:30.
You know, in some cases, when he would have a demon come out of somebody, they would, one time they would follow him. Some cases, yeah, the person would follow Jesus.
Mary Magdalene had, was it 7? 7 demons that he cast out of her. And she was there at the cross. All right, we'll pick up at Jesus healing many.
Sorry, I disrupted you, but
No, it's fine. It's fine. Make the note there. And this will kind of finish it up, and we're just moving into the next section. Thank you.